Hello, everyone, and welcome to the National Black MBA Association's Gold Key webinar, The Power of Influence in Business. Thank you for joining us. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to acquaint you with a few features of this web event technology. At any time, you may adjust your audio using your computer volume settings. On the right-hand side of your screen, you will see the Q&A window. To submit a question, type your question in the small text box at the bottom, and when finished, click the Send button. You may do this at any time during today's program. All questions that you submit are only seen by today's presenter. Questions will be responded to in the order in which they were received and will be addressed at the end of the presentation. However, please note that due to time constraints, our speaker may not respond to all the questions submitted. At this time, I would like to introduce our speaker, Dr. Lisa Lindsay Wicker. Dr. Lisa Lindsay Wicker is the founder and CEO of Linwick & Associates, LLC, a certified women's business enterprise global human resources firm with offices in Detroit, Michigan, and Charlotte, North Carolina. Additionally, she is the founder of the Career Mastered Women's Business Leadership Collaborative and publisher of Career Mastered magazine. An internationally recognized human resources thought leader, career strategist, entrepreneur, author, speaker, wife, mother, and friend, her dynamic approach to life and her signature style connects people across the world, and she finds her mission to be that of helping others to get the most out of their work lives and companies to create organizational value. She shares contemporary relevant work-life experiences and empowering principles with her clients as demonstrated in her books, The Winning Spirit, Building Employee Enthusiasm, and Power Play. As a board advisor and former corporate officer, she has over 2 decades of experience in developing and executing talent management and human capital strategies for multi-million-dollar big box retail, world-class automobile manufacturers, and global hospitality organizations. Following a prominent human resources career with Fortune 500 companies, including General Motors, Fiat Chrysler, MGM Grand, and Lowe's Home Improvement, Dr. Wicker has earned the reputation as a sought-after expert in the field of HR, change management, leadership, and career development. She has worked and presented to audiences globally, including India, Germany, Korea, Spain, and Switzerland. She was voted one of the most successful businesswomen in Detroit by the Detroit News and selected as one of Charlotte's 50 most influential women by the Mecklenburg Times. She has been dubbed a trailblazer by the Michigan Chronicle and recognized as one of America's top 100 executives by Uptown Magazine and Black Enterprises Magazine, Top Executives in Diversity. She received her bachelor degree in labor relations from Michigan State University, a master's in management from Central Michigan University, and a doctorate of philosophy from California Coast University, graduating cum laude. Welcome, Dr. Wicker. You may begin.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak and share a few business insights with you all today. And congratulations to each of you for your current level of career success and for being a member of the National Black MBA Association's Gold Key Access Program. You are already steps ahead of the competition. Given we have only an hour together, during this time, I've decided to review one key component of maximizing your career potential, and that one component is the influence factor. Why? Because at your current level of the organization, without this core competency, it will be difficult to maximize your potential as leaders. The power of influence in business is critical. It is one of 4 core leadership growth skills in every role, including the role that you sit in, directors and or above. The other 3 leadership skills to maximize growth includes communications, that is verbal and nonverbal, written as well, learning agility, and self-awareness. And so it's pretty much understood that at this level of your career, you already have those under control or under wraps, and The one, though, that is sometimes complex is that of influence. Leaders at different levels of the organization face different and difficult challenges. For you, at the director level, influence is key to maximizing your career potential. Effective leaders maximize the ability to influence others. So therefore, mastering this skill, regardless of role, your industry, or locations, is timeless and is critical. In the early stages of your career, influence was simply about getting along with Jim, Jill, or Jack, whom you had no authority over. It required give and take and being able to present logical yet compelling dialogue and or arguments. However, in the director or senior level roles, influence is more about being able to drive long-range goals and ultimately increasing motivation, inspiration, and of course, revenue. So today, we're going to talk about the power of influence in business. Why influence is important to maximize your career potential. 2 would be to recognize the skills of an effective influencer. And 3, we're going to provide a framework so that you can apply influence skills to everyday situations. Influence comes from the Latin influre, meaning to flow into. Again, to flow into. Influence is the ability of a person or leader to affect, to shape, or to transform the opinions and behaviors, including actions of other people, without necessarily having a formal authority over these persons. Influence can vary greatly at different levels in the organization. So therefore, I consider influence to have personal power, independent of one's positional power. Influence allows a leader to get things done and to achieve desirable outcomes without coercion. Influence requires convincing. It also requires persuading skills, not manipulating skills. Again, not manipulating skills. There is a difference. Manipulation, of course, is influence, but the aim is to change the behavior or perception of others through either indirect or deceptive and sometimes underhanded tactics. The outcome of influence, of course, is that people either, number one, genuinely commit because you have convinced them or persuaded them towards whatever the outcome you're trying to achieve. Or the outcome of influence is that people will either comply or give you compliance because they believe that they have no other choice, or they're just give in to your arguments just to get over the idea of whatever it is you're trying to convince them to do. And then the third may be that they resist. And the outcome is resistance because you have not gained their support. So I ask that you think about what it takes to maximize your career potential, either at the level you are currently or where your aspirations may lie, and determine what role influence will play in that equation. I believe that the questions we ask ourselves lead to the answers we discover. And I'll say that again, that the questions we ask will lead to the answers we discover. And so I'll ask you today to think about, who do you most want to influence to achieve the desirable outcomes that you aspire or that you have designed or envisioned? Knowing your stakeholders, of course, or the audience, is key to answering this question: who do you most want to influence? Do you need to influence, for example, your colleagues? Do you need to influence your peers or want to influence them? Do you want to influence perhaps your boss or perhaps your customers or even perhaps your direct reports? Who do you want to most influence? Your influence will vary based upon the stakeholders that I just gave examples of. And of course, each stakeholder requires different approaches for influencing. To be truly an effective leader, as a leader, you must master this ability to influence. And without this ability, what you envision may remain elusive. So let's take a look at influence power at a different level to maximize your career potential. And so we're going to talk about this model, and it's very simple. There are 4 components that we will discuss here today. And the components include skills that I believe if you understand and apply these skills to everyday situations, it's really part of what's necessary to gain commitment for your key initiatives and or proposals. And so let's see what it really means about influencing power. Number 1, we'll start at the top, and I think they tell me that I can use this arrow here, and see if I can get to this arrow or not. Bear with me. It doesn't seem to move. Here it is. We're going to start here. Accessing self is one of the components that we want to talk about, and I've included in this particular component also agency, and I will explain what agency is in just a moment. But the first step of this model is that understanding your influencing style is critical to your success, and that means that we would need to have the tactics to look at ourselves and be aware of what is our motive, for example, with regard to influencing. And, of course, the self-assessment will allow you to look at yourself and access what's important to your identity inside of your goals for the initiative that you would like to accomplish and why you are trying to accomplish it. Until we understand and do some analysis about ourselves, it's hard to kind of go forward with perspective of how you will go about influencing your colleagues or the specific stakeholders. And so what you are going to do in the first part of this model is look at your reasoning and your style in terms of influencing others. Part of this also is what I call agency. And agency really is about being your own pilot with regard to shaping your career, but also having self-clarity about what it is you're attempting to accomplish. And if you understand who you are, you understand what you're trying to accomplish, it's easy for you to set the example of what it is you would like to achieve. And so agency inside of this model is like self-promoting, but not promoting in a bragging way or not promoting in a way that is what I would call annoying, but more of being your own pilot and promoting the ideas that you have set in front of the initiatives that you would like to accomplish. The second one, of course, is setting the stage, or what I would call political intelligence, and some would call it political savvy. And so savvy leaders understand that the stage, or what I call organizational structure, they understand what's going on within the organization, or the stage of the organization and is aware of how it is set up. And so in order to have influencing power, they have political intelligence, and they are aware of how to practice that political intelligence. For this particular leader and this particular component, it can be a derailer if it's not understood or if it's not played properly. And so political intelligent leaders pay attention to nonverbal cues, for example, or they consider how others might feel, but they've set the stage to kind of understand before they begin to use the tactics that we'll talk about on the next slide in terms of influence. And so there are some tactics that we will use, but setting the stage and understanding politically the dynamics of the organization is key to the model in terms of influencing power. The third part of this particular model is to influence and have that power so that you can gain the commitment for your key initiatives, is involving others, or particularly understanding how to have trusting relationships while you're involving others. And so the idea certainly is on the premise that we cannot do it alone. And I think we all know that when we're working on projects, or even as we consider the journey of our careers, it certainly is not about doing it alone. So we must involve others. And so this component requires a leader to create and maintain trust, to guide people through change or through the process of getting to the outcome that he or she is attempting to achieve. And so people look for leaders who can inspire them and support them while creating conditions that foster trust. And so the key part of this is while we're involving others and we're going through this idea of having influence power, trust is vital for the influence to occur. And the last part of this particular model of influencing so that we can maximize your career is connecting with others and or leveraging networks. And so inside of this particular component, connecting with others involves a focus on relationships and what I consider key, which is cultivating the power of networks. And because organizations are dynamic, and I'm sure based on where you are and what you're experiencing, it's never the same, that your personal network must also be dynamic, meaning that it could morph in size or shape over time. It's not going to be stagnant. Influential leaders recognize this and are strategic about who and how and when to tap into a specific network. And so leveraging those networks really will play a key role in maximizing and gaining the influence power that you want to have. One thing is for sure is that, we cannot ignore networks, and ignoring, I think that ignoring networks can damage or limit one's career and leadership effectiveness. And the right relationship ties are an asset, and you should consider it to be one of your greatest assets as it relates to maximizing your career potential. What I find is that effective leaders rely on key networks and trusted partners to get results. A McKinsey study found that 50% of a company's intellectual capital is a relational asset. Again, 50% of a company's intellectual capital is a relational asset, and 75% of individual capital is their relationships. So, in essence, building the right network is important. I mean, it's more than half of what it is that we would consider to be our greatest asset. So once we have, and I'll just go back here, once we have these components, which I consider to be a model to help us gain and understand how to get necessary commitment for key initiatives, we then need to kind of understand a framework of tactics that clearly helps us further define how we go about influencing. And so the first one, of course, is, and let me just say this and preface this particular framework, is that you will want to think about your influencing framework tactics and the context for use. So in other words, this is a contextual mapping, if you will, of influencing, and what and when and why you would use each of these tactics will be situational. In other words, you may use one or more of them at the same time, or you may use them independent, but at some point in your influential framework, you will use these tactics. And so let's talk for a moment about the first one. The first one is rational persuasion. And, well, let me just say this. Before we get into the rational persuasion, I want to make sure that as we have walked through the model, that if we are talking about influencing and going back, if I would, just for a moment to the model, the self-assessment part of what we talked about is very key, so that as you go through this particular model, you will know which of one of these frameworks you currently use and or which one of these tactics that you use in this framework for a situation. So the first one is rational persuasion. You use logical evidence in this particular way of influencing to persuade someone that a proposal or request is viable. So this particular method is logic. And based upon logic, your goal is to persuade that other stakeholder regarding your proposal, and so that it would become viable to them. The second one is called inspirational appeal. So inspirational appeal is you make a request or proposal that inspires someone's enthusiasm by appealing to their values, appealing to their ideas and aspirations, and or by increasing their self-confidence. So that inspirational appeal is another tactic that can be used in terms of influential power. The third one is, of course, is consultation, where we seek someone's participation in perhaps planning a strategy, an activity, or change where their support is desired. So you would consult with that person as you're going through this process to influence them to commit to your proposal or the request that you're envisioning. And then the last one here is called collaboration. And, of course, we've all have ideas about collaboration and what that means, but this particular one is that you provide assistance or necessary resources to help them carry out a request or approve a proposed change. And so as we consider the idea of influence power as one of four core skills that we need or we use as the director or above level, meaning as we talked about at the beginning, where we talked influence is one of those, communications is one of those, learning agility is, of course, one of those. And as we know going forward, that each one of those make a difference in terms of what we do. Okay. So if we talk about influence power as a part of the business of maximizing your career, we want to talk about, in summary, what effective leaders must do to master the ability of influence, and that's kind of what we've talked about, that influencing others is one of the four leadership skills needed in every role, meaning, again, as I said, communications, leveraging agility, your self-awareness, and then influence and being key. Effective leaders don't just command, they inspire, they persuade and encourage. And then the goal is to influence others and not to manipulate them, meaning that effective ethical leaders use different approaches in different situations. And so with that, we will open it up for questions and hear from you. Are there any questions?
And just as a reminder, Q&A is located on the right-hand side of your screen. So to submit a question, type your question into the small text box, and when finished, click the send button.
So I'd like to open it up with the first question. It looks like from John Walls. I think it is, will we be able to get a copy of the deck? I think we're going to check on that and make sure that that's something that the National Black MBA decides to do, certainly make that available. Are there any other questions as we can go back to and through some of the slides and answer any questions that you may have or talk about the influence factor and currently what you're doing to use that within your journey and your careers? I'm still here. Is anybody there with questions? Let me hear from you.
While we wait for questions to come in, Dr. Wicker, I just wanted to see if you had any closing remarks or anything else you'd like to add.
Well, I guess for me and working with the National Black MBA, I know one of the keys to maximizing our careers when we get to a certain level, I know sometimes we don't think that influence is very key inside of where we are, but particularly the higher we go, the tougher it is from a contextual standpoint to take on the aspects of influence, whether it's a proposal or a viable idea that we would like to have envisioned and to come to fruition. This particular component is so key. And at the end of the day, because we're busy doing our jobs, we may not take the time to reflect, to think about what part of the influencing style or model that I need to use as we try to move forward an idea or proposal. So I'll go back to the idea of the framework or the tactics. Before we go in with a proposal, have we thought through whether or not that proposal should be one of a rational persuasion, an inspirational appeal, or am I consulting with someone to help me get this proposal through, or should I collaborate to help someone else with theirs? I mean, we're busy enough that sometimes we just don't sit back and think through what is the way in which I use influence skills, or have I just begun to use it without thinking? So those would be my thoughts. It looks like we have some questions right now. If we can answer them. It says peers can be difficult to influence. Can you give an example of a time this was challenging, and which tactic did you use? That's a very good question. And if you can hear me, yes, I've had many occasions where peers in particular was difficult to influence because maybe you were in a position that perhaps they weren't expecting you to be in that position, and or you both attempted for the same position, and yet you were able to receive that job or promotion, and they perhaps didn't, but yet you guys are still working together. What I would say is that two things I've done, and the example would be, and in fact it is an example where two of us were attempting to ascend to the same level, and it was actually the other person that received the promotion rather than myself. And that particular person thought that I was not probably going to be able to work well with him, given that he eventually became my leader. And so at the end of the day, I wanted to convince him to trust me enough to understand that I was excited for his promotion, but yet at the same time, certainly wanted to have the same opportunities. But I would do all I could to ensure that I collaborated with him to ensure his success, while at the same time making sure that we were able to accomplish the goals or the vision that he had set. And so I used collaboration at that point to provide assistance and resources to help him carry out what he wanted. And quite honestly, on the back end of that, I did become a key influencer for him, so much so that when the next opportunity came along for a promotion within our ranks, he recommended that I receive it, and I was up first for the interview and did get the position. And so it was one of those situations where it could have been totally different had I taken a different tactic, but I chose to influence him through collaboration, and it worked. I hope that answers that question, Ms. Williams. The next one is there a self-assessment that you recommend for the assessing self-agency step? There is a self-assessment, and what I will do is provide the link or the information to Megan and the National Black MBA, who's helping me with this webinar, so that they can ensure that you have an opportunity to use that or see it. There's a white paper, I believe it's either through the Center for Creative Leadership, and then there's another one that I've come across as well that will provide you with that self-assessment. Good question. The next question, I'll repeat it, says, when you feel you're working under ineffective leaders and or feel your leaders are not receptive to the insights you share, how can you use your influence to work around or through the ineffective leaders to accomplish your goals? Wow. I think we've all been there, quite frankly. Everyone that's in a leadership role is not necessarily the person for that role, and we sometimes end up with those individuals as our superior. And so the question is, how can you use your influence to work around or through the ineffective leaders? Well, I think the first thing is to get centered about what's missing from the equation in terms of your leader. And the second thing is attitude makes the difference, and certainly how we approach situations, given that you have to follow authority in order to be an authority. So regardless of whether that leader is effective or not, he or she is your leader, so we have to have some level of respect for that. And the other thing is you probably need to come into either the consultation or I call it inspirational pill, depending on the situation. And remember I said, with respect to influencing, it's contextual and it's situational. So you have to decide the particular situation that may show up as ineffective with your leader. I'm sure not everything is ineffective, but if there's a particular situation that is ineffective, I think we have to analyze what the issues are and have a chance to sit down to go through them. And so if I could give you an example, because I, too, have had ineffective leaders. I had a leader that perhaps was probably out of my career, the one that I remember to be probably the most ineffective. And how I found that leader to be ineffective is that they were much more of a micromanager than anything. And so it was very difficult for me to get things accomplished because of the style of the leader and the micromanaging that did not allow me to be effective, innovative, or creative to use all the talents and strengths that I brought to the table. And so it would be a very high demand for me to sit down with that leader and walk her through almost every project that I was given from A to Z. And it was pretty much a lot, if I can say, a waste of time because of the amount of time I needed to go through the details of that project rather than worrying about the outcome of the project. And so I was able to sit down with that leader eventually. It took some time. I couldn't just go in and like a renegade or to talk about what was wrong, but it took some time for me to build a relationship with that leader that provided her with trust in me to be able to point out those things that were not effective or a very good use of my time. And I will tell you that through that process, in fact, that was the position that I held just before becoming an executive, that process of patience and time and the ability to appeal to her in a way that we could have that discussion about what I needed and how I could do things differently. I would say that I did use an inspirational appeal, but also a consultation appeal to her so that I could move forward with my career. So I think you have to diagnose the situation, look at the context of that, and then decide which tactic within the framework of influencing that you would have to use when you're dealing with ineffective leaders. The next question is, if you're close to the CEO, should you use this nuclear bomb of option? If so, in which case, influencing a sales model in another business unit, or personally, if your direct boss is making poor choices for your team? I'm not quite sure if I understand the question, but I'll try to go through this again. If you're close to the CEO, should you use the nuclear bomb option? If so, in which case, influencing sales model in another business unit? I think what I'm going to do is probably take that one offline because I don't quite understand it, and I would be welcome and open to discuss something that may be directed to you individually because I don't quite understand that question. The next one, though, says, can I connect with, absolutely, can you connect with me on LinkedIn? Absolutely. I would love to connect with all of you, quite honestly, that showed up today for this particular subject on maximizing your career using the component factor of influence. They just clarified the question. It says, should I use CEO to influence the organization? And we can talk about it offline. I don't think that, I think I understand your question, and it says, should you use the chief executive officer to influence, I guess I'm understanding, the organization. I think we have to go back to the model that I mentioned when we talked about political influence and political savvy. Certainly that particular part of this model is important to understand what can be a derailer and what may not be in your best interest. I think that the political understanding of your organization frames really how well you do in influencing and understanding when and when not to use certain tactics and or people. And so even if you are one step away from the CEO or an officer of the organization, I think we always pause to determine when best to use, I call it that card, and whom to use it with. Certainly, when the higher you go within companies and the higher you are to the C-suite, the more you become very savvy about how it all works and what's an influence power and what's not. I think personally that the more that you can become the influence power, which is the ability to have people follow your lead based upon the model and the tactics we discussed, the better it would be because you become the point person that people go to. And so I'm still open for questions. These have been great. I definitely know that we need to follow up about the self-assessment survey as well as the deck, but certainly these have been great questions. Are there others? Well, I'll give you something to think about. I mean, if you all don't have other questions, I guess I do like this question is who do you most want to influence? I think we don't think about that enough. We get to the place where we come into work, we know our routine, we have, to-do items on our desk between the first day, Monday, through the end of the week, Friday. Have we really stopped to reflect and think about the week and what outcomes that I'm trying to accomplish? And if I have certain outcomes that I'm trying to accomplish, who are the stakeholders and what part of the outcome will they play? And who most will I need to influence inside of what we're trying to accomplish? And then what particular tactic will I need to use in order to get to where I need to get to by when? And so rather than just coming in, I think if we take for a moment and just use some of what we're talking about in the framework of the webinar here is before we get busy being busy, and sometimes we're busy just to be busy, have we stopped for a moment to ask ourselves what and why and whom are we trying to influence? And again, I say that the questions we ask ourselves provides a framework for us to have answers that we can discover. And those discoveries sometimes are aha moments that we have not had a chance to sit back and think about. And so that would be my summary today.
All right.
There are no more questions. I'm good.
Yeah, I haven't seen any more questions, so thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. And on behalf of the NBMBAA, we'd also like to thank you, the audience, for your participation in today's event. You will now be directed to complete a post-event survey. Webinars are an important part of our programming, and your feedback is vital to the improvements and developments of future events. Please take a few minutes to complete this post-event survey. This concludes today's program. Thank you, and have a great day.
And thank you.